Hey folks, welcome to Unsung Podcast. My name is Mark. I'm joined by Chris. Last week we were joined by Chris, another Chris. And this week we're joined by another Mark.
Yeah, totally. Doubling up all the way. We'll have to get Bruce and Derek though.
We'll have to get Bruce and Derek, yeah.
Sorry guest. That is an in-joke that you will probably not be privy to. Yes, Mark is our guest as well as our host this week. Mark Davyd. Now, I think it's really important, before we go any further with this week's conversation, take note of the fact that a lot of our listeners are very musical and involved in bands and groups and things like that, but a lot of them are lay persons. And on top of that, a large proportion of our audience are not British. And that means that a lot of the terms and acronyms that we're going to use this week, such as MVT and PRS, are probably a little bit alien to them. So we will seek to kind of disambiguate that stuff as we go along. But Mark is the founder and CEO of the Music Venues Trust. And Mark, I apologise in advance. I know you're quite a prolific interviewee and podcaster. I'm sure you've gone through this many times in the past. But in a nutshell, can you explain what Music Venues Trust is and why it was necessary?
Yeah, so it's in the UK, it's an official registered charity. And the purpose it was set up for was to protect, secure and improve grassroots music venues. Even that term is very specific to the UK, but we typically mean small, independent venues, typically putting on new and emerging talent. And there are different terms for them around the world. Grassroots music venues is quite a formal term, but for your listeners overseas, typically, well, in the UK, we used to call them the toilet circuit. In Australia, they call them sticky carpet venues, which I think is the best one. You know, that when you walk in, your feet stick to the floor. Dive bars. Yeah. But essentially, we're looking at where do artists take their first steps, where they perform the first song to the first audiences pay to see them. And we came along. I've got a long history with these. I founded one of these 33 years ago with some friends in a place called Tunbridge Wells. It's the Tunbridge Wells Forum. And for most of the time we've run it, and it's been running for over 30 years, it's been incredibly hard to keep it going. And that really got into a state of crisis around 2008. And we thought somebody would do something about it, and they didn't. So we ended up creating this organisation in 2014. And that was when we really started this work and started to formulate what is a grassroots music venue, you know, what is the importance of it to the music industry, what's the importance of it to communities. You know, there's a hell of a lot of work that's gone in the last 12 years. But much of that work for your international listeners actually will be familiar to them, but probably not with the same terminology necessarily.
Yeah, when I think MVT really came into its own, certainly from my own perspective as a promoter of a small venue, was during COVID. And it's such a crucial time. And that's when it started to make sense to sort of unionise to some extent with all these other venues that were in a sort of approximate bracket with us, because there really was an existential crisis taking place. And that kind of collective action was really vital. That's when we first crossed paths, and I know that that's the case for dozens and dozens of other venues, that you were there to provide some structure and reassurance and networking for people who often felt very adrift at that point. I think obviously that goes for the whole of society, but music venues, and there was something particular about the music industry, and especially the small music industry, that was really at risk during that time. The inability to gather together, the lack of obvious revenue, the difficulty you were faced with modifying your business in any way to accommodate what was going on. That must have been quite a stressful time for you, I would imagine, because suddenly this thing that kind of came about properly in 2014 was really like at the centre of most discussions that I was aware of at that time. Is that true?
Yeah, it became really interesting because we had been dealing with a sector that was in crisis for probably 15 years before COVID came along. And so because of that, we had a lot of data that it took a lot of other organisations quite a while to get together. We already knew how much it cost to open the doors, how many staff there were, all these kind of things. So we were very fast out of the gate. I'm very proud to say that as a result of that work, music venues, grassroots music venues in the UK, were the first cultural sector to receive any funding from government. It went ahead of theatres, ahead of museums or galleries or libraries. The first thing out of the door was an emergency grassroots music venue sector support scheme, and that was aimed at losing venues very, very quickly. You know, and just getting a small amount of money so they could carry on until eventually the Cultural Recovery Fund came along. But, you know, it was, I don't want to do it again. Let's put it that way. It's enormously stressful. There were moments where you literally wanted to punch a government minister in the face for just dreaming stuff up on the hoof. So yeah, it was complicated, but in a strange way, you're right, though, Chris. It did bring that sector together and make them realise, oh, I'm not in this alone. And that has carried on post-COVID, and people are a lot more open now to realising they're part of a whole sector that it's full of mavericks and it's full of people who think strangely and are doing odd things.
As you say, it's very interesting that it has never reverted back.
Yeah.
We're now in that post-COVID world, the MVT, the correspondence, the interconnectedness has just sustained, which is a much nicer landscape to be part of. I mean, it's something that on a local level we tried to do. I mean, I'm working from a Glasgow perspective here. We tried to do it with some of the independent venues. You know, it can be difficult to work with corporate venues sometimes because it's really not in their interests, really, regardless of the size of them. But being able to network across the UK and as you say, the speed at which the MVT and the various other groups, Music Venues Alliance and all that kind of stuff, were able to achieve things and able to get people talking and able to sort of help reassure people was pretty astonishing. I remember starting to apply for that funding as a venue really early on, and it was like, wow, that was really, really efficient.
Yeah, I mean, look, we had an amazing team. You know, we were very lucky. We actually, the biggest thing that people want to know about us is everybody in this team has run a venue. We've all put our hand down the back of the toilet at 3:00 in the morning. You know, we've all handled the difficult customer. We've all handled the band that got stuck in traffic. So the experience is very authentic. When you come to us and say, oh, this has happened, we probably know somebody's happened to. You know, it's unusual these days. Every venue is unique, and that's what's really good about them. But actually, the challenges they face are not necessarily that unique. You know, they're kind of shared, and by the way, shared across the world as well. That's really important to understand. The things like gentrification, they're shared everywhere.
So we really kind of come to you this week because we've been trying to set this up for a while, because you've been publishing a particularly good Substack for some time now.
Well, it's nice of you to say so. There are many people who don't think it's very nice.
I'm sure they'll get a mention in this as well. But you've been publishing a particularly good Substack for a while, and as you just alluded to there as well, one of the things that's striking about it, first of all, is the commonality of the experience across venues, the relatability of a lot of these things. But I think also the fact that you're writing from a position of experience. Now, there's a lot of very well-intentioned people, including government ministers and civil servants and people like that try to assist industries and, you know, clumsily do these things at times, do it in ways that can sometimes even be counterproductive. But the MVT's always had that advantage of having lived experience and people that are manning it from a perspective of, we have done this, we've seen this, we know that X, Y, and Z isn't practical. And actually, we'll highlight some of your work very shortly. That's going to form the bulk of what we're talking about here. But there's a couple of pieces in particular that when you read them, there's one where you kind of really talk about the fact that we can't have an honest conversation about the cost of putting on concerts, the actual cost of putting on concerts. It's not really something that the public nor the industry seems willing to engage with or face up to. And that can only really be something that's written by somebody who's lived that, because that is very much a pragmatic thing that you see day to day. It's not what you see in press releases. It's not what you see in brochures about the state of the industry. It's something you see when you're counting the money in the till and when you're looking at the ticket stubs at the end of the night. And I think the level of insight, why I think you're such an interesting guest is... So your own personal achievements, this Substack, there's some real standout material in that, Mark, and I think we're going to dig into a particular multi-episodic saga that you were responsible for earlier this year. Well, you've already said that this sort of like took on a real life in 2014. So there were issues to be addressed long before COVID came along, and there are issues that have been persistent throughout and continue to be persistent. And one of them is the Performing Rights Society, the PRS. And I don't so much want to say that it became the focus of your ire, because I don't think there was real ire in your articles. I think there was honesty and eagerness to clear the fog from what we talk about when we talk about the PRS. So these are 4 articles. You brought them out 1 week after each other. myself and Mark were reading them episodically as they came out, and were really like impressed with the way you just cut to the core of it. And there's a lot of hard data in there. We're not going to recite all these statistics. We are, however, going to touch on some of the key points. And our audience are gig goers, whether they do or don't play in bands and vice versa. They're almost all gig goers of some description, and it's really crucial that when they're going into these concerts, they know they think they're supporting small venues, they think they're supporting small artists, and they are, but the efficiency with which that money is being used to support those artists greatly varies, and you've really helped clarify that. So Mark, I'm kind of going to turn it over to you here and ask you to sort of explain to us, perhaps following the approximate structure of those 4 articles, what you addressed about the PRS and how this played out. And then maybe towards the end, we'll talk a little bit about the reaction, because I'm sure the PRS were extremely happy to get your feedback. But yeah, part 1, well, I guess you were setting the scene of it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the first of the 4 essays?
Yeah, I mean, look, the important thing to understand is when somebody writes a song, that creates a piece of copyright that belongs to them. And there are ways of collecting that. And one of the key ways it's collected, whether it's PRS in the UK or as Guy in Spain and South America or SACM in there are rights collections organizations. And to access your rights as songwriters, it kind of makes sense to be together in a big members organization. PRS is one of those members organizations, and it's the one that tracks the use of songs, or supposedly tracks the use of songs in the UK. The challenge is that the tariffs they use, which is the license fees, are not designed for what is actually happening in those venues. And I should say, I've been doing this a very long time. There was a point at which PRS, when they created these licenses and the way they work, they were reflecting an industry that existed in 1988. Mm-hmm. This is not the same industry at all now. And there has been no change to any license or tariff they've done. And there has been probably 20 years of arguments. I turned up in 2014, 2015. By 2017, we had got them to acknowledge that there was a problem. And that problem is, it's quite a lot of bits to it. But let's just deal with an easy one. If you are not a member of PRS, they collect the royalty that is due, and they keep it anyway, even though they can't give it to you.
So yeah, exactly. A very, very key point here. So if you are in a band and you go to play a venue, that venue very likely pays, or probably should pay, a PRS license. And many times that's kind of a blanket thing. And they are collecting money ostensibly on your behalf. But if you are not a registered member of the PRS, which a lot of people are not registered.
I've never been a registered member of the PRS.
Right? Then that money will be taken, and you should effectively be entitled to a share of it, but you're not. So there's a great deal of confusion, or at least there was confusion until Mark really pulled this apart and laid it out for us as to what happens with that. So in this first article, which by the way is called Who Pays the Piper, Mark makes a very clear point in it that in 2024, the PRS paid out $1 billion in royalties. These are not trivial amounts of money, and really quite astonishing percentages of that seem very oddly calculated.
You're a very polite guy. I mean, look, some of this looks so similar to fraud that you have to pick your way through it to understand nobody's done this on purpose. If they'd done it on purpose, I would be using language that was a lot more severe.
Yeah.
They have a system that doesn't work for the area it's trying to work in. And so, Mark, you've just said you've never been registered with PRS. You know?
No.
Okay. Honestly, I'm going to tell you that's now the majority of startup artists are not registered. It now costs £100 to become registered. It's slightly cheaper, you're under 25. Just think about I don't know how many gigs I've been to now. It'd be thousands and thousands. A huge number of them featured 3 brand new bands, one of whom formed 2 weeks before, playing songs they've just written. And a huge number of those probably never played another gig again. But what PRS did was take 4% of the ticket money and they put it into a bank account and waited for somebody to tell them that it belonged to them. And to do so, you had to be a member of PRS. And then at the end of that, if they keep it for 3 years, and if they can't find the songwriters to give it to, and this is probably the bit that lands the hardest with people when they hear it, they distribute it to the largest music publishers and the most successful songwriters in the world. Let's go back and just say that is literally the opposite of a Robin Hood. They are taking money away from the poorest part of the music industry and giving it to the richest part. It's absolutely absurd to have ended up with that system. I don't think anybody there is responsible for the fact that system exists. They are responsible for the fact they won't change it.
Yeah. This is that key distinction that we try to make, whether we're talking about music or politics, which is the difference between malign intent and just bureaucratic neglect. And I think this does feel like bureaucratic neglect. You want to think it's bureaucratic neglect.
Yeah, essentially what they're doing is facilitating a massive transfer of wealth.
Yeah, absolutely, and it is quite massive.
Well, and also, you did mention they're a £1 billion company, right? Well, so that's, I don't know about you guys, but that's so far outside of the way that I live or anybody I've ever met who was in a music venue. So far out, we can't wrap our heads around that. Equally, PRS cannot wrap their heads around the fact that £40 out of £1,000 worth of door ticket money is actually quite a significant amount of money if you wrote the songs and you're sharing whatever is left to pay the band after you've paid the crew, the lights, the hotels, like everything. £40 is not an insignificant amount of money to the people who are in these grassroots music venues. And I think it's the distance between that £40 and their £1 billion worth of turnover that's almost part of the conceptual problem. They can't understand why you don't just take £40 out of the petty cash and just, like, you know, it's the amount of money they lost on plastic stirrers yesterday.
As you've said in the subsequent articles as well, it does speak to a general ignorance of the margins. And I mean, in some cases, that could be put down to the fact that there is a lack of an honest discourse about how difficult it is to generate profit in this sector now. But there is an ignorance about the margins. £1,000, well, what's 40 out of that? It's like, well, let's work our way through the costs and see, once you've taken off all those deductibles, what is 40 at the end? And sometimes you're back into the red again.
Yeah.
So I think also, just to kind of ground this for our audience, because it is we do tend to have a kind of alternative audience, which I think means that actually, statistically, you're probably more likely to be the kind of audience that is going to venues where you are more likely to see bands that are not registered with PRS, where you're more likely to see bands that are playing original music that is not actually eligible for collection, and you're more likely to see bands that will never see a penny of that, because, as Mark's mentioned, it costs a not insignificant amount of money to join the PRS. And you have to, first of all, once you've paid that, be confident enough that you're going to recoup that, because a lot of people just go, oh man, what's the point in paying that? By the time I make £100 out of plays of our songs, because we're like a crust punk band that plays in squats, I mean, how am I ever going to get £100 back in revenue to justify joining this thing? All these kind of things add up. And if you run an alternative venue, especially a very alternative venue, of which, I mean, I certainly consider myself in that bracket, it's even less relevant. It's one thing if you run King Tut's, you know, where a lot of the people are going to be managed, they're going to have agents, they're going to have people that are supervising that. I mean, I've certainly been to a lot of music conferences in my time, and they do make an effort to tell everybody, right, everybody, you got to register for PRS, you got to stay on top of your collections, you got to get the money you're due. But it's admin. A lot of people in music are not particularly adept at that, and they don't have a team to do that for them. It's extremely time consuming, especially for somebody that's 18 and just wants to play punk rock music. It's not a realistic thing. And it's kind of one of those top-down, quite governmental approaches to things that are not grounded in lived experience. And that's why when Mark picks it apart the way he does, it does seem, frankly, quite absurd that it has become the norm.
Mm-hmm. I think we should also say, look, the thing of collecting the information is positively archaic. Yeah. I mean, I don't know the last time that you got hold of a pen and paper, wrote something down on it, got yourself an envelope and a postage stamp, put the paper in the envelope and sent it to somebody so they could read that. Because believe it or not, that is still one of PRS's main processes to collect the data on what songs has been played. And in a modern age where as we'll come on to, data is quite easy to collect digitally and to share digitally. The whole system is creaking under an absurd, massively out-of-date process that doesn't need to be like that. And as a consequence, once they have your money, and it's your money, it's not theirs. That's really important. People wrote those songs. That's their money. It doesn't belong to anybody else. The concept they're giving it to anybody else except the person who wrote the songs is fundamentally flawed. And then how do you get it back? You send in a written down set list. That enters into their system. And within 9 months, you may finally get back some of your money after they've taken their admin fee off it.
Yeah, I think you made the point that we'll talk about the two tariffs very briefly, but Tariff P, the first of the two, I think it's only, one out of every 4 shows generates a set list that would even result in any compensation, isn't it?
So there's 3/4 of an error.
Yeah, exactly. 75% of those aren't even being addressed. So can you unpack those two tariffs for us very quickly, Mark?
Yeah, so there's the main one that's in use in grassroots music venues is a thing called Tariff LP, which is live performance. That involves the venue being responsible, legally responsible within the terms and conditions, to supply a set list. And without the venue doing that, actually the money cannot be distributed. They will sometimes accept that the artist has submitted it, but ultimately the responsibility falls on the venue. So again, you're imagining a set of staff dedicated to finding out what songs are called, writing those down, putting them in an envelope, sending them to the office in London together with a check, and then somehow they bring together the check and the information they've got. The other one is Tariff P. That is where a venue pays a blanket license and has no responsibility to provide the set list. And the only way that money can be claimed is if the songwriter themselves is a member of PRS and sends in a set list to make the claim against it. Now, some people are good at that, There's a guy doing 1 gig a day at the moment who wrote to me saying, well, I get £10 a day. That's great. But to be clear, without that lengthy process of submitting the set list and everything else, you could be getting everything that's on that show instead of just £10. The average admin charge at our level is 28% of the money that's coming in. So immediately you can tell that guy who's quite happy with what he's getting, actually they've already taken £3.50.
Yeah, you made the point that a lot of these acts, especially when it's the LP one and it comes out the tickets, like you're giving their money away to PRS and then kind of hoping it comes back to you 9 months later.
It's one of the weirdest bit of the maths of the lot. Who ultimately ends up paying it? Well, the artist's fee will be reduced in order to pay the PRS.
Yeah. Because
there isn't anything else that can go. I mean, the rent is the rent, the rates is the rates, the security is the security. What's left? We pay the artist pretty much everything that's left, and quite often more than that. And anything that's a cost, we can't pay them. So this 4% it's just not the way. I always try and make it real. You're standing in a room, it's 11:30, the gig's gone really well, I've got cash in my hand, and I'm ready to give it to the person who's just played the songs they wrote. But before I can do that, I have to say, oh no, 4% of the money I was going to give you needs to go in this envelope. You need to tell me what the songs are called, and then I'll send those songs and that envelope to an office in London, where it'll eventually be moved out to a place in Leicester, then assessed by somebody else who I think might be in Dublin. And after they've done all that for 9 months, they'll send you back a maximum of 72% of it. Why not just give it to them? I mean, it's just so stupid.
Yeah,
it's just
absolutely. And again, to contextualise this for any people that are into like small promotions of their own, what you'll find is, the dry hire approach to a lot of venues now includes a PRS payment. The venues will calculate the fee for using that room. And let's be clear, a lot of these venues, even if the hire costs seem, at times you're like, oh, that's a bit daunting. Quite often they're not even covering what it costs to run and open that venue. But within that, quite often now there's this additional, PRS charge. So, I mean, PRS are taking bites out of this process at so many different stages, and almost all of them are passed on to either the people playing the show or the people working their hardest to make the show actually happen in the first place. And then it's, at best, a proportion of that even in the best possible scenarios, a proportion of that works its way back to the folk that actually, in theory, should have it in the first place.
Yeah, it's always good to talk in examples, and I won't name anybody because everybody's very sensitive. But I worked with a local artist for years who used to sell out the Tunbridge Wells Forum regularly, and he did it at a really good ticket price, but it was always full. And this guy eventually got a BBC Radio 6 music hit. You know, it was on the playlist a lot, and he was advised to join PRS. At which point, he had to assign the collection of his songwriting royalties to PRS. So we now had to pay him less than he'd ever earned before for selling the same number of tickets. And after a year, they finally sent him back £24 out of the £62 that we had sent them.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you extrapolate that across the whole of the UK's music scene, you know, bit by bit, people can kind of get a bit sniffy and say, oh, it's not really that big a deal, is it? Well, first of all, if you're doing gigs night after night, if you really knew what artists are getting paid and what profit margins are, it is actually quite a big deal.
It's a big deal. And by the way, everybody in that circuit. Another thing that's emerged post-COVID is a lot better understanding between venues and promoters and artists, which often the industry tries to ruin when it tries to professionalise everything. But if you stand at the bar with the band and you're there with the promoter and you're running the venue, everybody knows that pretty much all of us have lost money putting that gig on. Whether it's because we couldn't charge enough to put the lights on, or we couldn't charge enough for the promotion that's gone into it, or we couldn't charge enough to put petrol in the van. And I think this sector really understands each other much better than the professional music industry understands the whole sector. You know, I think there's so much understanding now. Look, you're trying to build a career or you're trying to make art, you know, like what's wrong with that? I mean, not everybody wants to sell out Wembley Arena. Some people want to play the flugelhorn over some white noise, you know, and what's wrong with that? Yeah. So there's a lot of understanding, but again, people just don't. They're sat in their office, they're dealing with these £1 billion sums. They just don't understand that 40 quid might be quite a lot of money in that equation.
And there must be a sort of self-sorting mechanism there. You're talking about the flugelhorn example, and it, you know, the more esoteric and outsider your art, the harder it's going to be to recoup that membership fee. Yeah. You know, the longer it's going to take, and the more likely that person is that they'll get to that point where they have to pay to join, and they'll be like, nah, what's the point? It's not worth the hassle. So really, you're actually sort of biasing the entire collection system towards the mainstream, because it does mean that the further off the map you go, the payments, the repayments are going to be smaller because there's a smaller, more, you know, niche audience.
That guy playing the flugelhorn, his money ends up with Taylor Swift.
Yes, absolutely. Because it sits in that pot. In the second essay in the series, Show Me the Money, you looked at the collection and the distribution and the amount that goes unclaimed and where it ends up. And obviously, across the course of this, you talk about how when that money sits unclaimed, it ultimately is distributed based on the proportion that these artists get of the other parts of the pot. Is that correct? Am I
kind of, well, major concert series. So if you're playing arenas or stadiums or major concert halls, they will try and give you some money. And if you're getting a big radio hit, they'll try and give you some money. The metric for deciding what was played on a Tuesday night by 3 brand new bands in Glasgow is, well, they must be playing cover versions. Why would they do it otherwise? I mean, I don't
make any sense.
You know, again, they're so far away from what people are doing and why their motivations for doing it, and you know, the economics of it, that they just struggle to understand. The most common reaction I've had in the 9 years of trying to deal with this is a blank stare of disbelief. Well, why would you do that?
Well, talking about blank stares of disbelief, can you give us an idea of the amount of money that goes unclaimed, let's say in a kind of collection year?
I can give you a good guess, but the other thing that's a factor here is the absolute lack of transparency, which it is difficult to avoid the conclusion that it's anything other than deliberate. How much money do they... We all call it the black box, this unclaimed royalty thing. And when they slip a little bit, even PRS staff will call it the black box. although publicly they deny that it's a black box. So within this black box, we think there is probably around about £30 million sitting there at any one time. And roughly 18 million of that probably came from grassroots activity that they don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Right, and let's put that in, perspective. The entire profit of more than 800 music venues of this type in the UK in 2025, collectively between all of them, they returned, I think, around about £12 million in profit. So the amount that PRS are holding from that grassroots sector is more than the profit being made in the entire sector, from the smallest room of 38 capacity to the largest room in one of our members, which is 1,600 capacity. It's more money than all of those venues. 50% of the venues, over 50% of the venues in the country made a loss in 2025. And that loss, you can, if you get really into the granular data that we know about, you can end up realizing, wow, about 25% of those, a quarter of the venues made a loss, wouldn't have made a loss if it wasn't for PRS.
Wow, that is damning. Yeah. Are they obliged to, is there a limit for how long they're allowed to have cash just sitting in their account, Father Ted style? Do they have to, are they duty bound to then use it for, investment, or to then pay it out to other clients?
They make their own rules. And again, I would say, even for PRS members, it is not clear at all what these rules are. There is a court case happening at the moment where Dave Roundtree from Blur is, separately to everything I've ever written, he is, as a PRS member, contesting what they do with the black box, which he believes disproportionately goes to music publishers rather than to songwriters. Yeah. And then, of course, if you think this through, honestly, this is so bad, by the time we talk through it all, I start laughing. But if you think about it, if you give it to the music publishers and it doesn't have any data as to who it belongs to, what can the music publishers do with it? Who can they give it to? Even if they are giving it out, who are they giving it to and why? What data point are they using to decide who gets the money they were handed?
Yeah, and by the very fact they're music publishers, their clients are generally higher profile anyway.
Yeah.
Because they've got a publishing contract. In the third of your essays, Take the Money and Run, you obviously you looked at the way that the royalties break down, but I think quite crucially you made the point that PRS are aware of and have acknowledged the failings of this system, and yet it seems have completely failed to act or modernise it. Is that a correct assessment?
I think, again, you're such a polite bunch of guys. Okay, so
it's not an accusation I get very often.
On this issue maybe, but look, in 2015, a review of Tariff LP was called, and that it was called by PRS. They wanted to put the rate up, and eventually they did manage to put it up from 3.2% to 4%. But in the middle of that, we laid all this out for them, and they needed consensus from the music industry, and we held out and said we would not give them consent because of all these problems. And in the end, in 2017, to get consent, they wrote to us acknowledging all these issues and committing that they would be changing things, particularly the collection of set lists, particularly the transparency of what they were collecting and who they were distributing it to, and a lot easier process for venues. And they agreed to back down on a lot of kind of legal threats and the way that they acted around venues, which is heavily litigious and really, really quite damaging to the whole sector.
So basically in 2017, in writing, they acknowledged these failings and to some extent committed to reform. In 2017, had that in black and white.
Yes, and I in that third article, I published that letter for the first time. A lot of people knew it existed, but when they read it, PRS members started writing me saying, my God, what's happened here? 2018 was the time by which they were supposed to have delivered this, and there was meant to be a report on what they had changed by 2019. And what's the rules on swearing in this podcast?
Go for it.
Fucking none.
Okay, good. Because they delivered the sum total of fuck all. Absolutely not a single thing was changed. Nothing that's written in that letter was ever delivered. They did nothing whatsoever. And legally, we are in the position where we should probably report that to the Copyright Tribunal, who oversees these things, and highlight that, in fact, because of that failure, which is conditional on delivering what was in that letter, there is no agreement between grassroots music venues and PRS for music on the terms and conditions of the music license. They don't have our consent to it. We don't agree with it because they didn't change it.
So thus far, we're basically saying they've got a really clumsy and opaque model that effectively transfers money via a kind of quite complicated process from smaller, poorer, more obscure artists up the way towards registered members and then divided up between, bigger artists and publishers and things like that. They have, under duress, I'd imagine, acknowledged that in writing that is clearly outdated and not really an appropriate system, and definitely, I would imagine, achieving the opposite of what it's intended to do, which is to incentivize songwriting and songwriters and new material ultimately, and yet they have completely failed to act. So to get to the fourth of your articles, which was about ideas for change, suggestions, progress, steps, routes forward, can I first ask, do you think is PRS just a labyrinthine behemoth, or is there a sense of unaccountability? What's your sense of why this hasn't changed?
That's a really great question, because it is now turning into a PR disaster amongst their own members, with the public who are starting to ask questions about it, with MPs who are starting to ask questions about it. It's come up in a number of select committee inquiries, famously in the CMS Select Committee, where a member of the PRS staff, you can look up who it was if you like, gave evidence to the CMS Select Committee and effectively said, if we don't represent them, it will be a cover version of one of our members. Like, there's no original material being created in this country unless somebody first joins PRS. I mean, it's a very absurd position. I think they are both a giant oil tanker that finds it difficult to turn, and also, unfortunately, singularly unaware of the practical issues on the ground. They're not there at 11:30 when we're all having an argument about whether actually the support now needs another 10 quid because otherwise they can't put petrol in the car to get home. And so I think it just blurs into a mess of bad practice that, as I say, they've been unwilling to sort out. And we have tried. I want to be really clear. We only broke public with this when it became very clear that despite concrete promises to run pilot tests on what we'll probably end up talking about, audio recognition software, platforms that can do this work ultimately, we kept being told they would do something, and it became really obvious they're not going to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, speaking from personal experience, after reading, I think it was the second of your essays, I had gotten in touch with them about something related, which was to do, as a venue, we pay a PRS license. And it was just to do with that, with the opacity of that, and and they were completely uncooperative in their response. Now, what I wasn't sure of was your article had broken. In fact, I think it was the second essay, because people were really talking about it. And I couldn't tell if, maybe they've just circled the wagons because they feel like they're under attack, or is this just normal? Is this just every day for them? They just simply disregard your correspondence and don't feel beholden to really give you a clear answer on anything?
Well, I mean, they're in two current court cases, like big high-profile ones. They are constantly in litigation with small venues on estimated bills, which is another amazing process. The estimated bill thing, which I did talk about in these articles, there's a margin of error you can imagine if you've got to estimate a bill. Let's say you've been working with a venue for 5 years, and it says that there's this amount owing to PRS every year, and you can see that. When it gets to the point where they feel like they have to estimate a bill because they don't have the information, the margin of error between what has been established in the historic record and what they will then demand is 3 times. If you're paying them £5,000 a year, the bill that will arrive, on average, will be £15,000.
Yeah, I think from memory, there were a number of case studies, weren't there? And it was around about $6,000 a year that people were overpaying of those 41 case studies or something.
It's
a huge amount of money.
It's genuinely an astonishing thing. I mean, and you would be stunned, and listeners would be stunned, how many times PRS end up in a county court getting a judgment on a basis of an estimated bill that is vastly inflated, and then when it gets recalled, because quite often the venue didn't even know they were in court, that's another thing that goes on, and then you end up in this weird situation where to get rid of the CCJ, you pay them money that you cannot possibly owe them on the basis of an estimated bill, you then have it corrected, they don't return your money. They keep the money against future bills.
Wow. Mark's got that exact blank stare you were describing.
Yeah. Just reminded me of something else about working with a distributor for digital distribution. I won't go into that just now, but it sounds quite similar in terms of like taking money that you've just earned and kind of putting it against what you would maybe earn and owe them, and what you would potentially owe them in the future.
The music industry is notoriously a bit of a Wild West, a bit of a regulation kind of black hole or kind of like quantum event. You know, you don't really. It's a very strange place, but PRS do seem to really epitomise some of that. You know, that some of that bizarre, arbitrary financial sort of like jiggery pokery that goes on in the music business. Can I just stress as well for the audience here at this point, you know, on a 1 or 2 off basis here, you'd think, right, guys, this is quite into the weeds. You're like, please bear in mind, this is happening hundreds and thousands of times. Please bear in mind the sheer number of members that are paying for their membership fees and then never really properly recouping. And beyond that, the multiples of them who are not registered because they're like, I can't afford the membership fee and I'll probably never get it back anyway because I play a flugelhorn over white noise. I mean, just the scale of this is actually quite astonishing.
Yeah, you've seen those bands, you know those bands.
Yeah, you are the people that are going to those gigs and you are putting money into that. You're involved in playing their music here, there and everywhere. And the money isn't making its way back to them. And as Mark says, it's quite often going to Taylor Swift. And you wonder why I get so pissed off about Taylor Swift in these episodes.
Well,
but I mean, we
have parsed. It's not Taylor Swift's fault. Can I just say, I mean, look.
She can defend herself, right?
Yeah. Talk about the scale of it. Look, it's in 2025, there are 177,000 shows in this sector, just in the UK. Like, you just think about, let's say it was even just imagine it was just £40 in average out of every gig. You're talking about £6 million. In our sector, that's a huge amount of money being taken out without knowing where it's going. You mentioned
as Mark said, 53% of venues fail to make a profit.
Yeah, and listen, you mentioned the music industry. Do you know Hunter S. Thompson didn't actually say this, but do you know the quote? The music industry is a shallow plastic trend where thieves and vagabonds run free and good men die like dogs. It also has a negative side. Now, I don't mind that bit of it. Look, I like being in dark rooms at 2 o'clock in the morning and feeling that we're living some sort of lawless existence, although increasingly that's not how things are run. Things are run very professionally now. The typical venue owner used to be a guy in his 40s with slick back, pearl cream in his hair and a sheepskin jacket. And at the end of the evening, he'd bring out a bunch of rolled up £20 notes and he'd go, here you go, lads. Here's some money for a kebab, you know? That's all gone. What we're left with now is enthusiasts in the artists, enthusiasts in the promoters, enthusiasts in the venue operators. And to have this massive oil tanker of bureaucracy pushed into that thing is soul destroying, it's ridiculous, and they cannot understand the impact that it has. I mean, we've had, when you talk about the support we offer venues, you would be horrified how often we are offering mental health support to a venue operator that has been taken to county court, could potentially see their business closed down, you know, applying for bankruptcy against a venue, that's another thing they do. Just absolutely unacceptable behaviour when you look at this is about creativity and culture and communities coming together and a space to artistic expression. It's completely bang out of order.
So not meaning to, put a spoiler on your articles, because we do want people to go and read them, but what were some of the potential solutions that you arrived at in part 4?
Well, I don't know, actually. Things have moved on slightly since I made the bold claim in part 4 that it was solvable. We are actually now in the process of solving it. Uh-huh. So there is an audio recognition technology platform called Audio, AUDOO, and I would recommend anybody listening.
Is that the one that Elton John's a big fan of?
Yeah, Elton John and Bjorn from ABBA, and I think McCartney's involved, and a few other big ones. Because, by the way, when some of the biggest stars in the world hear about this, they're furious. Mm-hmm. You know, why am I getting money that doesn't belong to me? Why can't we make the system work? So basically, in the middle of the articles, I said that Audio had a partnership with PRS. What I didn't know is that partnership had come to an end because Audio had proved that their technology worked and wanted to deploy it, and PRS didn't want it.
So what does Audio do?
It's Audio do. By the way, I continue to refer to them as Audio for about a year because it's just the way it's written down, just look like that. Yeah. Anyway, so look, it's a tiny box. Imagine the sort of box that you plug into a wall that might be a baby monitor. It's slightly smaller than that. And built into it is a SIM, so it doesn't require a Wi-Fi or anything. And what that box is doing is looking for the musical signature through the lyrics and the melody and the rhythm and the timing and everything else. And what it's doing with that is then giving that piece of music a signature, and that signature is sent to their central database. And for pre-recorded music, so if you're playing background music or you're having a DJ event, the accuracy level is as close to 100% as makes no difference.
Yeah.
And for live music, it's 85% recognition, which is actually telling us something straight away. And by the way, it's never really been deployed at grassroots music level yet. So we think the level of recognition may drop quite substantially. But the way that it does it is it matches it to a musical signature that's on any digital streaming platform, whether that's Apple or Spotify or Tidal or whoever. They have roughly 140 million tracks registered, and it looks for that musical signature. And because of the fact that it recognizes lyrics, actually, your version of it, if you're doing the cover version, could be quite extreme. You know, like I said to somebody, well, actually, there is a part copyright exists in lyrics. It can recognize that part. Even if you're playing a sludge metal version of Dancing Queen by ABBA, the fact that the lyrics are done, it can recognize that and say, okay, this is partly that.
Sounds like a banging idea, by the way.
Yeah. Okay.
Sludge metal version.
So
for the audience's benefit, they may, a good analogy might be something like Shazam, which recognizes sort of audio fingerprints, if you will, of songs and can register them automatically on that basis. I mean, I get data feedback on Shazam from my own bands about people who've been looking for the songs around the world. So effectively, if Audio or equivalent or a competitor were doing this, they would be recording tracks with what sounds like a very high degree of accuracy and registering that automatically to create not a perfect, but it sounds like a far more accurate record.
Levels of accuracy improved by fourfold. We go from roughly 20% recognition from Setlist to over 80% recognition. The important thing to understand is because it's using the DSPs, what that means is that the total catalogue is significantly in excess of what's registered with PRS. And so there are two bits of data. The first one is that platform, and I think you're right, other platforms can do this, it can say whether this has ever been released on any DSP.
Right, so for example, our bands that have got stuff up on various streaming platforms, it would acknowledge our bands, even though we may not have those songs registered.
Yeah.
And immediately, I think it starts to become clear why PRS may be somewhat less incentivized to act on this, because suddenly all these people that are not in their purview, so all these people that didn't take the time, they are now accountable to them because it's the money that's flowing in is actually recognised as being, let's say, due to Mark and Mark's group, or let's say ABBA for getting covered by a sludge band. Yeah, and so basically PRS have just rubber-eared this? They've kind of like slow-walked it?
So they effectively walked out of the partnership, refused to deploy it. My belief is what we're doing, we've now formed a partnership with Audio, and we've statistically analysed the sector, and we've found 108 rooms in different geographical locations with different content, different curation, different capacities of rooms, we are now installing those 108 boxes, plus a few extras in case anything goes wrong. And from 1st of July, we will be monitoring all of those, and we will be able to give everyone a full printout of what was played. And what that will, first of all, show us is what cannot be recognised, so therefore it can't be in the PRS catalogue because it's never been officially issued. The second thing it will tell us is, here is the fingerprint of these songs, and that is the point at which PRS could act in an entirely different way. They could look at that information and say, actually, these ones are the ones we represent. Only pay us for those. There is no need for you to pay us for the other ones. We don't represent those people. And that would remove that kind of post-settlement can be done almost instantaneously. So the fingerprint signature exists within 24 hours. So a PRS could just have a feed, and if their data system works correctly, they could know exactly which music written by their members played in those 108 venues, and they could claim that amount of money rather than a roundabout money. Gets rid of all estimates, gets rid of everybody being charged for music they don't represent, leaves that money in the venue so it can be shared between the venues and the artists and the promoters, that we can work out a way that, if necessary, let's say there's one songwriter in the band. Okay, well, we could do that locally. You know, that's the 4% is not a bad idea, but it is a bad idea if it ends up going to people who didn't write the songs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got two remaining kind of key questions here. I think the first one would be, because they're not here to represent themselves, if you wouldn't mind, could you steelman the perspective from PRS? What are the most convincing responses you've had from them? What are the strongest sort of rebuttals? And beyond that, my second question would just be, and what has the reaction been generally to your articles?
On the first one, they have stuck religiously to the concept that they represent 100% of songs written. And I find it hard to accept that, but we will find out when this data emerges, and there is always the possibility. Listen, if you ask for data, you've got to accept what the data says. Yeah. So, you know, if it turns out that they do, for some reason I can't think of, represent every song that's ever been written, then fair enough. You know, I mean, that's the other thing they've always stuck to is this money coming into them at least means that it goes to songwriters. Mm-hmm. It's a bit of an esoteric argument, but there is a point at which you could understand it, that if it wasn't for this, there is a risk that actually money would not be collected, and in fact, songwriters would lose out as a generic group in a way that they are protected if they're within the PRS thing. And the last one they always say is, well, this could all be resolved if every songwriter signed with PRS.
Yeah, I think if PRS made their membership free, maybe they would get that wish.
That could be a result of the data, and it could strengthen them, you know, that actually they could become the genuine administrators of all the songwriting royalties. But pretending you are when you're not, I think that's quite hard.
I find the membership fee perplexing. When you consider the overall scheme here, like there is money being generated, there is a potential for the organisation to take a very small percentage of that for sustainable, you know, ends to fund their own costs. But the fact that people have to pay an entrance fee to be invited to the party of getting their own money back is never really sat right. And it's, let's be honest, it's a fundamental reason why so many, especially people, you know, lower down the ladder, just do not pass that first barrier. That is a giant filter that just keeps so many people out of this entire 100%. Conversation.
And then your second question was, what was the reaction? Do you know, funnily enough, we're just about to go semi-public with this. I've had more than 200 PRS members directly contact me, and they are furious. And we asked whether we could quote some of them, and the answer was no, because they control my royalties, and it's such a behemoth that we're worried that we may be penalised for it. Venues finally feel on this issue like they did on COVID, going back to that conversation, they finally feel united around a positive position where we can try and do more for songwriters that we know than PRS have ever been able to. But we did, in the process of doing this, have some venues break cover and say, listen, this has happened to me. And remarkably, in a kind of correlation that should trouble everybody, nearly all those venues that have stood up in public are mysteriously under more scrutiny from PRS than everybody else. They are being actively asked questions and investigated in a way that I'm not going to say is causation, but it's remarkably close to, okay, you've said something and now apparently we need to do a big investigation of you.
Yeah. Funny, that's kind of funny, that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing the coincidences that have played out there. But.
So, Mark, first of all, we want to thank you so much for your time on this. I'm glad we were able to actually do the interview. We tried it before and then just schedules couldn't align, but it's been really, really interesting, and I think the writing you've done is superb. I got in touch with you personally just to say that. I think it's great. I think it was very important that it was articulated the way you did, because it's very readable, but it's also extremely dense in facts, and I think you've walked a very fine line there very well. I would encourage listeners to go and actually read it in its entirety.
We will link it in the description.
If you were remotely interested in this, and if you've at any point you've shaken your fist in anger while you've been listening or watching this, trust me, there is far more outrageous stuff in Mark's articles. Like when you actually see some of these scenarios spelled out, I mean, it is proper forehead slapping stuff. Okay, so please, Mark, how can people find your stuff on Substack?
Yeah, if you just look for Mark Davyd, MarkDavyd on Substack, I'm the only one on there. It's me and a Brazilian DJ, and he's much cooler than me. So.
But yeah, Mark, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for the work you've been doing in this. There's many other things you discuss on that Substack, not just this, other aspects of music that are really interesting. But yeah, I would really encourage folk to go on there. Mark, what were your takeaways? It's a great
read. You know, eye-opening, definitely. As someone that's never signed up for PRS, like I said earlier on, it kind of confirmed.
What stopped you? Can I actually? You're a good.
It was the fee.
It was a fee.
Yeah, it just didn't benefit me. You know, my music's never really played.
There's a fee for other collection societies as well, and after a while, you're like, how much do I have to pay? Yeah.
But you know what? Here's the thing they could do with the black box. What about if they use some of that black box money to pay the entrance fee for the people who aren't getting their royalties at the moment? There's
a means test. You know, just like something that makes it more accessible. It is fairly shocking.
Yeah.
Mark, thanks so much. I know you're a busy man. I know you do a lot of these things, so much appreciated, and we hope to
when we get the data, I'd love to come back and talk to you, and let's
that would be super
follow up where we say, it turns out that everybody's playing sludge metal versions of Dancing.
maybe we can do a show where we get you to pick some of your favourites off that CD rack behind you there as well. Okay, take care of yourself. Thank you so much for your time.
Love you.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks.
Cheers.